Welcome to Mission to Inspire, where we share life experiences in our careers, personal lives, society, culture, religion, finance, family, and much more. Meet your host, Shola Ajibade, as she takes you on a ride to fuel your inspiration.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mission to Inspire. My name is Shola, and we've got our guest here with us today. His name is Bob DePasquale. How are you, Bob?
Shola, I am wonderful today. I'm on a mission to inspire, hopefully, just like you. So it's going to be a great podcast.
Lovely. Let's inspire some people. Great. And I'm sure you're going to inspire our audience today anyway, based on the topic that we will be discussing. So, Bob is famously known as the generous guy. Going to tell us why he's known as the generous guy. He's a compassionate philanthropist and very inspiring figure. He's dedicated to making a positive impact on the world. That is what he's doing through his life experience. He is actually making a very great impact, trying to change our perception of generosity. And that is what we will be discussing today as well. So, with a heart full of generosity and a deep belief in the power of giving, Bob has become a catalyst for the change, just as we said, and a beacon of hope for a lot of people. So today, Bob will be talking to us about generosity. But before we get into that, Bob is actually a speaker, he's an author, he's a host, he's an entrepreneur. He's seen it all.
I wear many hats, Shola.
Yes. But a long time ago, I think about 18, when he was 18, he had a very terrible experience, which actually led to what he's doing today. And he's using that experience in a positive way to help people. So today we'll be discussing the magic of giving and its profound impact. And I'm sure Bob will be taking us through why they call him the generosity guy and how he's been helping a lot of people and organizations and businesses as well. So Bob, in a little while, you're gonna be talking about yourself. But before we do that, please, we're gonna ask you to answer a few questions. It's this or that questions, just for us to know you a little bit better. Okay. So I'm just gonna shoot. Outdoor adventure or indoor lounger? Which one are you?
Outdoor adventure, absolutely.
Do you like camping or luxury hotels?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm going to go luxury hotel, which sounds counterintuitive to being outside, but I'm not very much of a camper because I don't know if I could survive out there.
You cannot survive anything.
I mean, I can survive a lot, but if you put me out in the woods and tell me to stay alive for a week, I might struggle.
Oh my goodness. Okay, we wouldn't do that then. Comedy or drama TV shows?
Comedy, absolutely comedy.
Yeah, we absolutely love comedy. Summer heat or winter chill?
Summer heat. I live in Florida. It's 95 degrees here. I love it.
Okay, great. iPhone or Android user?
Android. Strong thoughts about this one. Android, 100%.
Okay. Okay, where are we now? Okay, so I'll start from summer heat or winter chill?
Summer heat. It's very hot where I live and I love it.
Right. iPhone or Android user?
Android. I'm very strong on this one. 100% Android.
I use Android as well.
Good, good.
Friction books or non-friction?
I would say nonfiction.
Non-fiction, okay. Speaking or writing?
Speaking.
You're an author.
Yes, but I'm a speaker first. I'm actually I was trained in broadcast journalism, so.
Okay, great. Lastly, generosity or luck? Which one do you believe?
Oh, generosity, 100%. I mean, slam dunk, Shola. You knew the answer to that one.
Yes, yes, we know. Okay, so straight to the questions then. How could you share with us how you developed your passion for generosity and what inspired you to become the generosity guy?
Oh, that's a great question because there's two different answers. The long journey answer is, I was going back and forth. Well, I don't want to say back and forth, but I had two different careers. I started off, as I mentioned, in broadcast journalism, and I was recruited into finance. And I really learned how generous people want to be. But it took it took over a decade for me to work through that process. So that's how long it took for me to get to a point where I could be the generosity guy. However, earlier in my life, you mentioned in your introduction, when I was 18, I had quite an experience that really changed and shifted my mind on the power of giving. I may not have realized it as much at the moment, but I always think back to that period of time in my life. And I'll be happy to share the story if you'd like to hear it.
Yes. Yes, please.
Sure. So, well, when I was 18, I don't know about you, Shola, but most people that I know, when they're 18, they think they're invincible. They think nothing can take you down. You're a kid, you're young, you got your whole life ahead of you. And I felt that way. And I grew up in South Florida here in the United States, which is in the very, very southeastern tip of our country. And I was born in New York, which is about maybe 3 hours plane flight from where I grew up. But I was born there and I moved down to Florida when I was 3. And I said, you know what, I want to go back up to New York for college. So after I graduated high school, I went to the university, or Hofstra University, which is on Long Island near New York City. And I went there for 3 reasons. One, because I could play football, American football. Number 2, I could get to know my family a little bit better because all my cousins and my extended family lived up there. And then finally, I can get an education. Now, I think my parents hoped that the education part was a little higher on the list, but at least I went up there and I did end up getting a good education. But while I was there my freshman year, before it started, I was in training camp for football. And so it was basically me and my teammates and no one else on campus. And you're training pretty hard. A college training environment is much different than it is in high school. And so I had pulled a muscle in my groin, or at least I had thought I did. And another, my first reality check in life or in college was, you don't realize how much, if you pull a groin muscle, that you can't move. I mean, you can't walk, you can't sit. I don't know if anyone out there listening has ever pulled a groin muscle. It's an extremely debilitating injury. And so I would do these rehab exercises on a daily basis because I couldn't play football, let alone, I couldn't even walk, let alone play football. So my rehab exercise that I would do was I would sit on this 3-wheeled stool and I would shimmy myself across this massive training room with, it could be almost 100 people in there on a given morning during training camp. And it's like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And I look so ridiculous doing that, but that's what they told me to do to strengthen the muscles in my hips, I guess. I don't know, to try to recover from this injury. And one day our head trainer, a really small guy, his name was Rick. He's probably 5'6" and maybe 160 pounds, which I don't know what that is in kilos, maybe 60, I don't know, maybe 60 kilos, which is a wild guess. Not a big gentleman. And he stands up on a box in the middle of the training room, and he used to have to do this to get everyone's attention. And he would cup his hands and scream to try to get people to be quiet to make an announcement. But for some reason, it felt like it got dead silent that day. This might be the only part of the story I'm exaggerating, but it just seemed to me like it was dead silent. And he yelled and he said, "Bobby," and they called me Bobby at the time. "Bobby, you have to get back out on the field. Quit being a weakling." And wow, Shola, that was such a shot to my ego. His head, this little guy, this trainer's calling me a weakling in front of all my new teammates and coaches and the training staff. And I had a more private meeting with him later that day or later that morning. And I said, listen, Rick, I'm not getting any better. Like I want to be back out on the field. Don't you know that I want to play ball here? And he said, all right, well, I'm going to send you to a doctor. So he sent me to a doctor, and then I had a series of tests. And then over the next week or so, I was driving all around Long Island, New York. Now I'm technically an adult because I'm 18. Yep. But I mean, I'm not really an adult. You know, I'm still this what I thought was this invincible kid who didn't really know much about the world. And so I'm going to all these different doctor's appointments, and I had every test in the book, Shola, you name it, MRIs, CAT scans, ultrasounds, sonograms, everything, all these different tests. And every time I would go into an appointment, I'd have to fill out all this paperwork. And I mean, I don't know anything about medical insurance and tests and my medical history. I mean, all I know is that, I'm about six feet tall. That's all I knew. And it would take a while to fill out all this paperwork. And then I would sit there. And by the time I got finished with the test, I would be in there for hours and hours and hours. And so finally, I had what I thought was going to be my last doctor's appointment or test. And it was on the day that my parents had planned on flying up to New York from Florida. So now this trip was scheduled months before, and they weren't going to cancel it. But in my first game was supposed to be just a couple of days later on a Saturday. But we knew I wasn't playing in the game at this point, but my parents were still going to come up. So I went to this appointment expecting to be there a few hours, knowing that my parents would be flying during that time. Yeah. I went in, and I expected to be sitting there, like I said, for hours again. And within like 30 seconds, they called me back into the office. I walk into the office, the doctor's, I sit down, and less than a minute later, he comes in, sits down, and he looks at me and says, Bobby, I got something to tell you. You have cancer. Oh. And I said, what? I mean, my jaw hit the desk. And I was silent. I had no idea what to say. And the only thing he said to me was, don't panic. We're going to hook you up with an oncologist and get a treatment plan. You're free to go. And I thought to myself, I don't even know what an oncologist is, no less anything about cancer. I can't believe this is happening to me. So I stood up. I was in shock. I walked out of the office, and it was like divine timing. Shola, I kid you not. I walked out of the building, and the moment I walked out of the building, my phone rang. And it was my mom. And she said, hey, I expected to get your voicemail because I thought you'd be in the appointment. How did it go, though? And I was like, oh, Mom, let me tell you. So I had to tell her what happened or what the doctor told me. And it was dead silent, but it was almost as if she was screaming all at the same time. And the only thing I could remember hearing was my dad in the background. He was also in the car that they were in from the airport. And he was yelling himself, Susan, Susan, that's my mom's name. He's like, what's going on? And even he could tell that I had just told my mom that I had cancer.
Oh my goodness.
And so we met back at my uncle's house, my mom's brother, who still lived in New York at the time and still does to this day, actually. And I hadn't seen my parents. I mean, I hadn't been away from home. I mean, Shola, I'm a mama's boy. I'm an only child. The longest I had ever been away from home was maybe a week and a half. And this was going on 6 weeks now. I was away from home. And I gave my parents a big hug, and we looked at each other. We shed some tears. We said a few prayers, and we were thinking, wow, what are we going to do? So that was a really, really trying time, obviously, in my life. And we were to try to figure out what happened or what we could do. And a couple of days passed. And now it was that Saturday that was supposed to be my first game, college football game that I wasn't playing in. And my uncle's best friend came over his house, and his name is Tim. And we didn't know him because we lived in Florida. We had never met the guy before. And he said hi to my aunt and uncle. And he walked over to my parents, didn't know them from Adam, and walked over to my parents, pulled the keys out of his pocket, and said, Bob and Susan, I can't imagine what you're going through with your son right now. Take my keys and my car. You can have it for as long as you could possibly need it. And my parents looked at him, and they were just flabbergasted. They didn't even know what to say. And I thought to myself, wow, that's the most generous thing that someone's ever done for me and my family. And so Tim was there for maybe 15 minutes, and he left. And that was it. He said goodbye to my aunt and uncle and was gone. And we were like, what in the world? Who is this guy? And my uncle was like, yeah, that's Tim. He's a generous guy. So he left, and a couple of days went by. I did speak with an oncologist, and we were going to figure out the treatment plan, but I had to do some testing, some additional testing. But one thing he told me is don't drop out of your college classes. Stay enrolled in classes, especially if you're going to stay up in New York to get treated. So my first ever college class was that following Monday. Everything was totally normal. Got out of the class, hopped in Tim's car, went back to got something to eat, went back to my uncle's house. Same thing, second ever college class was on Tuesday morning. And I came out of the class and I was kind of hungry. So I went over to the cafeteria, and I'm sitting in the cafeteria. And do you remember, Shola, the televisions that were like a tube square television, a small one that would be hanging from a bracket, between the ceiling and the wall in a public place?
Yeah, they look like boxes.
Yeah, like a small TV that, you don't see those anymore. You see flat screens like the one behind me, or right?
Yeah.
So I'm in this cafeteria and the news is on this television. Now I'm healthy. My eyes are healthy. I'm kind of almost squinting to watch the news because it's on, it's in the corner of the ceiling and the wall there, but the news is on and I don't know what channels to watch or whatever. So I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. I'm just watching this. I'm eating a breakfast burrito. And all of a sudden they show a video of a plane hitting one of the Twin Towers in New York City. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, that's what a terrible accident. So I called my dad, who was back at my uncle's, and I was like, hey, Dad, did you see this? The plane just crashed. And he's like, yeah, I'm watching it live. That's it's terrible. And so we were talking for maybe a minute or so. And then all of a sudden, bam, another plane hits the other Twin Tower. And my dad was like, oh no, son, that's not an accident. Something's going on. You better get back to your uncle's house. So I watched the 9/11 terrorist attacks there, September 11th. And I didn't know what it was at the time, but I hopped in the car, and that breakfast burrito is probably still sitting on the counter there. I definitely wasn't done with it. I just hightailed it out of there, got in the car, and I'm driving, going to drive to my uncle's house, which should be about 15 minutes from school. But Shola, it took me 9 hours.
Oh my goodness.
To drive from school to my uncle's house the whole time. And I told you I have a degree in broadcast journalism, master's degree, studied it. I loved radio, but I will never, ever, ever listen to 9 straight hours of AM radio again. But I listened to the whole broadcast about 9/11. There's burning towers in the distance as I was driving. I mean, it was an incredibly terrible, moving, emotional time for me. And luckily, I was able to get off the highway, and I ran out of gas, but in my uncle's neighborhood. I can't imagine if I would have ran out of gas on the highway, forget about it. It would have been a disaster. But I got into my uncle's neighborhood, and we had to push my car into his driveway. And my aunt was panicking because they couldn't get a hold of my uncle. My parents were happy to see me, but my aunt was really, really worried. And so finally, we were looking at each other and we thought, wow, I thought my life might be over after this cancer diagnosis. Now I feel like the world's coming to an end. What are we going to do? But my uncle finally called at, maybe 6 o'clock at night. I don't know the exact time, but it was in the evening. My uncle called and it was like, I know you guys are probably panicking. I'm sorry, but I got stuck in Denver. He was on business in Denver and he was supposed to fly back that morning. But thank God his plane wasn't one of the ones that was attacked. And we were about to hang up, just being relieved. But he said, wait, before you guys hang up, unfortunately, I found out that my friend Tim was in the towers this morning and he died. So Tim, this guy who just did the most incredibly generous thing for us, lost his life just 3 days later at that point, and just 5 days after my cancer diagnosis.
Oh my God.
And so it turns out, Shola, you asked the question, why I speak about generosity, and excuse my my verbose explanation of this, but I think it's really important to think about it, is that Tim was known for being a generous guy. He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, which was an investment bank, an investment firm that you may have heard of before.
Yeah.
They lost just about everyone in their staff in the terrorist attacks that morning, except their CEO and president of the time. His name is Howard Lutnick. If you can watch the press conference and the video of him describing what it was like to lose your entire staff. And the only reason why he wasn't there that morning is because he for some reason he was late or had to take his kid to school or something. And he was actually one of the people walking down the road there when the tower collapsed. And so it's amazing how that gentleman, for whatever reason, was spared that morning. But unfortunately, Tim was not. And Cantor Fitzgerald was so generous that they gave free office space to my uncle's foundation for cystic fibrosis, which is a disease my cousin has. And luckily, no one from this foundation was in the office that morning. And the only person who was supposed to be, her name was Tammy. She was the lead employee over there. She was uncharacteristically late as well that morning, got stuck in the subway beneath, and luckily escaped. But the stories that she can tell about that morning are just incredibly moving. And so ever since I went through that experience, I thought to myself, well, there was a reason why Howard Lutnick and Tammy Amaker were spared, but for some reason, Tim was not, even though he was known for being a really, really generous person. And he would say, you never know when your last opportunity to be generous is. And it just so turns out, Shola, that his last opportunity to be generous was for my family.
Oh my God. Wow. 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 And that sums it up anyway. That sums it up. Oh my God. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear. Oh, wow.
And
so I'm
Tim,
sure till date, you will still, even though you are living through the experience, inspiring people through the experience, that loss is still there, that vacuum is still there. And he was that generous person that helped at the time.
It is. And not a day goes by that I don't think about that period of time in my life. And I said the only thing I might exaggerate was how silent it was when Tim was screaming at me in the training room. I truly, truly believe that I truly know that I don't think about other times in my life. I mean, there's that period of time in my life I think about every day. There's not a period of time that I don't. You forgive me with the cameras here, but I always think about that time. And what happens to me is that it reminds me of how lucky I am to be alive, that I survived the cancer. Here we are 22 years later, almost 22 years, and just a month or so, it'll be 22 years that I was diagnosed, a couple months. And but I always think about the day that not only did I survive, but also I had the opportunity to experience in that period of time an extremely generous act. And it made me realize, I don't actually know when my time on this side of heaven is over. And so I have to use the resources that I have. And you don't have to be an extremely wealthy person financially to be a giver. It's truly a mindset and not an event. And so I do think about that all the time. And although it is sad to think, it's also joyful at times, because it made me realize how powerful that is. And I've since had the opportunity to speak to some of Tim's kids or all of Tim's kids. And they were just kids, like young kids at the time. And so for me to be able to express to them how generous their father was to my family has been a really powerful experience.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. So if people want to contact you, because I know you're a speaker and you speak at events and stuff like that, and you're an author, there are other things that you do. If people want to contact you, how can we contact you?
Yeah, the best way to get a hold of me is go to my website, bobdepasquale.com, and all my social links, my DMs are open to there. There's also a form if you're an event planner or someone who's looking for a speaker to come talk to you and your organization about a culture of generosity. I would be more than happy to do so. I truly believe that generosity is good business. So if you're an organization or company and you want your staff to collaborate and be joyful at work and attract the most loyal customers, I mean, let's face it, people want to do business with people who are generous. I mean, that's the nature of humanity. So yeah, you can check me out on my website there. You can also, you see my book in the background. That's also a link is also on the website if you're interested in learning about that. So thank you, Shola, for this platform.
Thank you so much for coming on our show today. Before you go, you're not going to escape these questions anyway. We've got a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
In your experience, what are some of the most impactful acts of generosity you've come across, and how have they made a difference in people's lives?
Sure. Well, you heard the one in my life, but
Yes, yeah.
one more recently that I've seen is a really, really good friend of my wife and I's and our family had major surgeries, and it was kind of touch and go for a while. She had some unexpected things happen to her, and she was in the hospital for many months, and surgery after surgery, then a couple of mistakes, and it was really, really rough for her and the family. And so we thought one day it'd be really nice to bring them some food, because her husband was driving back and forth to the hospital to see her, plus working all at the same time, and then her kids were at school and had their sports and everything, so it was very, very hard for them to sit down as a family and eat. So we just decided, okay, we're going to bring some food over there for these people so that they can, that just give them a little bit of respite, not expecting much out of it, just trying to be nice. And someone else found out that we were doing this. Someone said, oh, is anyone going over there? And we said, yeah, we brought them over food the other day. And this person was like, well, one day is not good enough. And we were like, yeah, you're probably right. So this friend of ours made an online document or a list of days, basically a calendar. And within like 3 or 4 days, they had filled up this calendar for 3 or 4 months of meals for this family. And every person only had to do something really small. Some of them showed up, spent some time there, and brought the meal. Some of them just dropped the meal off. Some of them hired a DoorDash meal delivery service. It took people all of maybe 5 minutes, if at a minimum, and maybe an hour or two at a maximum, to support this family. And so that's just an example of me of, like I said, generosity is a mindset and not an event. It's not just, hey, I did something nice for someone. It's, hey, our community came together, we collaborated. That's why I believe it's such a powerful force for businesses, because collaboration is extremely generous. So people collaborated on this. Instead of one person having to cook meals for them for 90 days straight, we just got the community together, and a handful of people took turns and spent a little bit of time, and we stacked on top of each other our abilities to help them. So that's a more prominent, more recent example of it. But it's just the power of giving.
It's just the power of giving, isn't it? Yeah, it's just the power of giving. It's always good to give. And as they say, the end of the giver is always up, isn't it? It's
scientific, Shola. The giver, a good friend of mine by the name of Wendy Steele, who's the president and founder of Impact 100 Global. If anyone's interested in looking at that organization, they do great work. But she talks about the 3 different parties of a giving experience. And it's scientifically proven that oxytocin and other hormones are released during this experience. And so not only does the giver experience something, obviously the person who receives a gift or a generous act feels it. But even third-party onlookers, someone who has nothing to do with the actual act, but just sees it happen, also receives this hit of oxytocin and joy. So generosity is truly contagious.
It is, absolutely. So what are the benefits and positive outcomes that we as individuals and societies as a whole experience through this practice of generosity?
Well, there's 2 things. Well, there's millions of things, I would argue. I mean, I could talk about it for hours, Shola, but there's 2 primary categories that you might mention. And one of them is what I was just talking about, the emotional benefits. And I think those are the most powerful. So I would talk about those first in any situation, about the emotional power of giving. When you become a giving person, your possessions and money and stuff loses its grip on you.
That's true.
And I'm the first person to admit, I mean, I've got some false idols in my life too, right? Some things that I think, when I was a kid, if you would have taken away my video games or my football, forget about it. I would have went off the deep end. But now I've matured a little bit and I've learned, and I still have things in my life, but the emotional power of giving is so strong. And like I said, it's not just for the person giving, it's for the receiver and the third party onlooker. And then the second benefit too is what I think, a lot of organizations do a really good job of promoting, is they show the work that they've done, the tangible work to help other people get better in life. And so you can't underestimate that either. While I don't think it's as powerful in the long run as the emotional benefits, I still think if you have someone who needs a meal and you give them a meal, that's a pretty darn good thing that they're able to eat when they wouldn't have if you wouldn't have given them the meal.
That is very true.
Don't underestimate that either. I mean, giving the benefit that you give to someone is powerful too.
Mm. So in your pursuit of generosity, have you encountered any obstacles?
Yes. Two more categories on this question too. I'm working in twos today. The first thing is the inability to provide someone with what they need. And I think that's the biggest obstacle for anyone who's trying to be generous. In fact, I get that question all the time. Bob, I don't have enough money. I don't have the resources. I don't know how to help this person.
Yeah.
My prayers aren't working. I get that all the time. And, it might be another question that you have, how to overcome that, but that's certainly one of them.
Yeah.
My short answer on the overcoming, just in the instance of time, is to collaborate. As I said in the previous example, I never would have been able to give that family a meal for 3 months straight, but I could give them, a meal every, once a month. I can give them 3 meals and have 30 other people do the same. And then the other hurdle or roadblock that I've run into is society. To be quite honest with you, it's the rules, whether they're written or unwritten rules in society, and that people don't believe it makes sense to be giving in some cases. I have some strong thoughts on this. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I think the self-help world, although I did mention I'm interested in nonfiction books, but the self-help world and the internet and a lot of the content that's put out there tells us that we're not good enough, and that we need to read a book, or we need a life hack, or we need a new supplement or a new course to be effective in life.
Yeah.
And to be able to provide something to society. And I just don't agree with that. While I think self-development is a powerful force and we should all be striving to get better just about every day. And this is, I truly believe that, but that doesn't mean that we're not good enough now. And so we need to take action. And so the hurdle is that I'm trying to spread a message of generosity. And a lot of times I think people think that giving is so extremely radical because we need to help ourselves first because we're not good enough. And that's just not the case. So I do talk about radical generosity because I think being radical, first of all, being radical has a bad name. Like radical doesn't mean bad. It doesn't mean negative, or it can be, but it's really a multiplier. So if you're a bad person and you're being radically bad, sure, then you don't want to be radical. But being radical just means doing something out of the ordinary that people may not think is a good idea. And in generosity, talk about power, Shola. When you do something that is so radically generous for someone and someone else looks at it and says, why would they even consider doing that? And then they see the benefit it had for the other person. I mean, there's nothing more motivating and more building of the generosity kingdom, if you will, than doing something radically generous. So those are my roadblocks, but we can jump over them. We really can.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Your book, how can we purchase your book? We're going to invite you another day to come and talk about that book.
Yeah, I would love to talk about it.
How can we purchase it?
Yeah, so go to my website, bobdepasquale.com, and there's a link there. It says the book, or you can just go on Amazon and search Personal Finance in a Public World. You may not be able to see it, but it's Personal Finance in a Public World. So that's a little bit of what we've been talking about today, mixed with personal finance, which is my profession and how I've been making a living over the past 15 years. So.
Okay, great. Any inspirational advice for our viewers out there?
Well, I hope some of what I've said so far has been inspirational, but I would, it's to piggyback on what I was just saying, never underestimate your own ability to change someone's world. And I heard at a concert once when I was, it's over 20 years ago. It's probably before that cancer and 9/11 experience that I had. The lead vocalist of the band said, "You may not change the world, but you may change the world for one." And so that's the mindset you got to have. Don't try to change the world. Just do something great for someone in your, locally, and you might change their world.
That's true. Don't just try to change the world, but try to change somebody's world. That is so true. Wow. Taking baby steps.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We've really enjoyed your life experience, your journey. Thank you for sharing. When you were sharing, it was really hard to take in what you went through at that very early age and how you coped with it as well. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show today to share. We really appreciate. Thank you.
You're welcome, Shola. Great questions, and I hope everyone is inspired to make a positive impact in the world.
Thank you. And until next time, it's Shola and Bob. Thank you so much for coming on our show today. It's goodbye.
Thank you for joining us today on Mission to Inspire. Subscribe if you have not already done so. Like, comment, leave a message. Let's stay connected. Let's jointly inspire the world.